Hello and welcome to the How to Carnivore podcast. I'm your host, Simon Lewis, and you're tuning into the Plant-Free MD series with Dr. Anthony Chaffee. Dr. Chaffee is a surgeon, nutritional researcher, and former pro rugby player. He's been strict carnivore for 3 years and an on and off carnivore for more than 20. Dr. Chaffee looks and feels like a real-life superhero. If losing fat, building muscle, finding focus, and getting the most out of life is important to you, you're going to love the Plant-Free MD series.
Hey, welcome back to another episode with the Plant-Free MD, Anthony Chaffee. And today we're talking about a topic that he's very well versed in. And the topic is plants are trying to kill us. So welcome, Dr. Chaffee.
Yeah, thank you very much. Good to see you.
Good to see you. So Dr. Chaffee, first question is, how did this all start? How did you discover that the plants, salads, vegetables that we're told are so healthy for us are actually trying to kill us?
So when I first got into carnivorism, without realizing I was getting into carnivorism, as I've said on in different outlets, is because when I was 19, 20 years old, I was taking cancer biology at the University of Washington, and we were looking at things, from a cancer perspective, but we were looking at plants and so forth, and actually how they could cause cancer and have carcinogens naturally occurring in them. This isn't something that's too wild. I learned in 7th grade biology that plants and animals are in an evolutionary arms race. Plants becoming more and more poisonous, so less and less animals can eat them so that they can survive and thrive, or else they go extinct. Animals becoming more and more adapted to specific poisons in specific plants so they can eat that plant and survive and thrive, and other things can't eat that, so that becomes their dedicated food source, and also protects them from the poisons in that plant. But that doesn't mean that they have protections from poisons in other plants, so they can only eat that plant as well, so they can become hyper specialized as well. So we were learning this all again, but from a cancer perspective, looking at carcinogens, and we learned over 20 years ago that we had already known about 136 known human carcinogens occurring naturally in things like Brussels sprouts. White table mushrooms had over 100. Spinach, kale, lettuce, celery, cabbage, cucumber, you name it. All these things had 60, 80, or over 100 known human carcinogens each, and they were actually quite abundant. There was a professor, Bruce Ames from Berkeley, who published a large paper in 1989 showing that 99.99% of the pesticides and insecticides in a plant occur naturally in the plant as opposed to what we spray on them industrially. This was because in the 1980s, everyone was eating a lot more plants and people were getting quite sick. And so they said, well, we're eating healthy. We're not eating meat. We're not eating, nasty fat and cholesterol, which was, up to that point thought to be the only bad thing that you could ever eat. And everyone was getting sick. And so they thought this must be the pesticides. And so people rightly pointed out that we've been using pesticides for many, many decades and had never had these problems. These were new problems. So how can a new problem be caused by a traditionally used
That's a good point.
method such as pesticides? So he did the research and he looked at this and he found that even in the context of pesticides, there were 10,000 times more naturally occurring poisons in plants like spinach than the pesticides we sprayed on them by weight. And that the naturally occurring pesticides were far more likely to cause cancer than the pesticides we sprayed on them, several orders of magnitude more likely. And so it was a drop in the bucket. And this this is why we still have pesticides. This is why they're still legal. They were trying to criminalize them, and they did criminalize some of them, but they basically had to stop at that point because the evidence was very clear that the plant was worse than the pesticides we were spraying on them. So we were quite blown away by this. We thought he must be joking. I was looking around for like a TA. Everyone was looking around wildly just for seeing this. Who's in on the joke?
Yeah,
I was expecting someone in the corner just to be snickering and just like, oh, he does this every year. No one was, and it slowly dawned on all of us that okay, this guy's serious. And I was like, okay, well, but vegetables are still good for you though, right? And I remember thinking that in my head. And right when I thought that, he just looked at us and just gave us a funny look and said, I don't eat salad. I don't eat vegetables. I don't let my kids eat vegetables.
Wow.
Plants are trying to kill you. So I was like, all right, screw plants. And I just stopped eating them. I went to the store and I just only, everything had a plant in, everything had wheat, everything had bread, everything from bread to wheat, pasta to mixed meals. They all had some sort of plant-based issue with them. And so I was like, right, plants try and kill me. I'm not going to buy anything with a plant. So I was like, eggs don't come from plants. Milk doesn't come from a plant. Meat doesn't come from a plant. So I just ate eggs, meat, and milk. At first, it was very restrictive. I thought it was I was just looking at all the things that I couldn't eat. After 2 weeks, I just didn't care. I didn't even look at bread or plant-based food as food anymore. I really couldn't even recognize it. There was a time where I was living with my brother and he said, oh, can you pass me the bread on the counter? I literally couldn't see it. I'm like, where is it? It's like, it's right there. It's right in front of you. It's right by the, I actually couldn't physically see this stupid piece of bread. And he was like, by the back right burner of the stove, directly to the right of that. And I looked at it and then slowly just popped into my vision like a magic eye painting where it's like just all fuzzy. And then all of a sudden a sailboat pops out. And I was like, bread. I was like, I didn't even realize we had bread. So that was my foray into carnivorism early on. I absolutely felt amazing with that. And looking back, I realized, okay, that's why I felt so good, because that's what I did at the time. I didn't realize it had made such an effect on me. But that's the thing. And so, after that, I was like, okay, right. I knew it. I knew plants were trying to kill me and stay away from these stupid things. Now, it's not that plants are trying to kill us. It's not they have any animosity towards us. It's that they don't want to die. Like any living thing, every living thing has a natural defense, and so while animals can run away or fight back, plants can't. And so they use poisons and different sorts of things as a defense, but all of them use poison. They use poison as a main deterrent. So when you eat them, it causes harm to, the host that eats this, and that deters them away from eating that plant. And that's their natural defense.
On that point, so I imagine that there is a scale of how toxic or how damaging a plant is. So, for example, if there's a certain part of the plant that it really needs to protect, I imagine that's going to be more toxic, like the seeds. And then if it's, if they're trying to spread something like via the fruit, I imagine that's going to be less toxic. Can you kind of expand on that?
Yeah, exactly. So, as I've said, many times, the way I look at it is everything defends its baby more than anything, and a seed is a plant's baby. And so that's where you'll generally find the highest concentration of toxic elements is in the seed, because it does not want you to eat that. Now, people say, well, fruit are fine because the plant wants you to eat the fruit. Not necessarily. It wants something to eat the fruit. Right. But how many berries around the world do we know will just kill you outright? We know that don't eat the red berries. Like, this is something that we know traditionally when you're foraging and so forth, you stay away from certain sorts of things like red berries. You just don't eat red berries. That's a typical sort of thing. And there are red berries that you eat, like raspberries and things like that. But by and large, that's a rule of thumb. If you're just eating random ass berries in the woods, you don't eat the red berries. So a berry is a fruit. A berry has a seed. A berry wants something to eat it, does it? But not you. Okay. And the cassowary bird are a very good example of this. They live in the tropical areas of places like Australia, and they eat fruit. That's what they eat. But the kind of fruit that they eat from these tropical trees will essentially kill anything else. They're highly, highly toxic. But the cassowary bird has no problem with it. That's because there's this symbiotic relationship between the cassowary bird and the trees, because cassowary bird are the main germinators of those seeds. And so if it doesn't pass through the digestion of a cassowary bird, that seed cannot turn into a tree. And so if the cassowary bird were to leave that area or become extinct, those trees would all die off as well. And so there's a symbiosis between those two species. So yes, the tree wants something. It wants the cassowary bird to eat its fruit, but it doesn't want you to eat the fruit, because its seed won't germinate if you eat the fruit. And so, yes, and for us specifically, because we come from an herbivorous background 8 million years ago, we still have some defenses. We have the agricultural revolution was about 8,000 years ago for certain areas. Agriculture came up independently sort of in 7 different areas. And the earliest version of that was about 8,000 years ago. And so the descendants of that people have some more defenses against these sorts of things. And so, yes, some things are worse than others, as evidenced by the fact that if you get lost in the woods and you run out of food, you can't just eat any random plant because most of them will make you very, very sick or even kill you. The movie Into the Wild was very,
I was thinking of that when you mentioned the red berries. I was like,
yeah, exactly. So that's a very good example of that. This kid was out in the woods, just living off the land. Great. But he, picked the wrong leaf, and he picked something that is not edible, and edible meaning that it's not as poisonous as other things, and you can survive on it for a time. And he ate the wrong thing and he died. It was very sad. But this is a very typical thing. There are big books about how to forage and what to look out for. Most of the things out there you cannot eat. Most plants will kill most animals, or at least be very harmful to most animals. Kill them at a certain to a certain degree. If they eat enough of it. But there's a ton of different ways that plants defend themselves. This is very basic botany. There are different ways that plants defend themselves. There are a lot of really interesting ways that they defend themselves, but they all use poisons. As far as I know, I've never been told or heard of a single plant that doesn't at least use some sort of chemical deterrent to dissuade at least some species. So this is something that's very abundant, and there's so many different examples of this. Lectins are a very good example of this. Is something that people know about being.
What are lectins?
Yeah, lectins are a carbohydrate-based protein that exist in most plants. There are some animal-based lectins as well, but these don't seem to cause any problem or harm when you eat them. But the plant-based lectins do. They cause a lot of harm. These likely evolved to defend the plant against things like fungus or insects, but because there's a lot of very similar mechanisms, molecular and cellular mechanisms between all life, and it's certainly animal life, that there's crossover, and we get damaged by these things as well. Lectins are very interesting. Lectins come in combination with other things that are in plants, such as gluten. So like wheat germ gluten, and this is something that people talk about with celiac and so forth, and then it became very in vogue for everyone to have celiac, even though almost no one had celiac. But they weren't actually far off base, because gluten actually just causes harm to anyone, whether or not they have full-blown celiac. So gluten binds to different areas in your gut and can actually break the tight junctions between your cells and actually make physical openings between your gut lining. And this is when and so this is called leaky gut. And so bacteria and things like lectins, which your body would normally not absorb, can pass into your systemic system and then cause all sorts of havoc. Gluten is also 80% of the protein in wheat is gluten. Gluten can't be used as protein by us. We don't actually break it down. We don't absorb it. It just causes harm. And so this sort of plays into what we've talked about before with the bioavailability of plant source, nutrition. They say, oh, look at all this protein that's in wheat. Yeah, you can't use 80% of it. Okay, so that's not really helpful, and it's causing harm. So when you're eating things like gluten and so forth, you're getting leaky gut. This allows things like lectins to get into your body. These things, they can bind all sorts of different things because they're carbohydrate-based protein. They can bind carbohydrates very, very easily. They can also bind insulin receptors. So, even people in a ketogenic world that have eliminated carbs and sugar, they can actually still put on weight and retain fat because they're eating things that contain lectins. And lectins bind to insulin receptors. Insulin is obviously forces energy into cells. It doesn't allow it to come out of the cell. So it makes your body store fat and doesn't let your body use the fat. And there have been studies that actually shown that different lectins can actually bind insulin receptors tighter than insulin itself. And so it actually stays bound longer and has more of an insulin-like effect than even insulin itself. And so you can get quite a lot of weight gain from eating lectins, especially when you have leaky gut and it gets into your system. And eliminating these sorts of things from your system, all of a sudden people lose a lot of weight. I certainly noticed that. I was just eating vegetables like spinach, kale, broccoli, and just meat. And just by dropping the spinach, kale, and broccoli, I lost 10 kilos in 10 days. And so, it would just came right off me. And I was eating more calories. I was eating much more meat. I started eating a lot more meat, a lot more fatty meat. So I probably quintupled my calories, but I lost 10 kilos. Okay. And so that's likely why. And also, the different sorts of water weight that I would have been storing as well from the inflammation in those plants. So it can also block leptin. Leptin is something that we've spoken about before, which is released from your fat cells and go up and tell your brain how much energy you have. And so lectin can bind to the leptin with a P receptors and make them insensitive. So now you're getting, you get like peripheral insulin resistance. So your insulin doesn't work well on your body. Now you get leptin resistance. And so now your brain can't recognize the leptin. So it thinks you have much less leptin than you really do. It causes you to overeat. And so we see this in mice models that when you block the leptin or give them even lectins that cause leptin insensitivity, they gain weight quite significantly. And if you knock out leptin in mice, they just eat and eat and eat and eat and eat, and they can't stop, and they just balloon up,
just like humans.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so, and that's the thing, because when insulin blocks leptin, fructose also blocks leptin. And so it's like you don't have any leptin. This is what causes you just to eat and to eat and to eat. And it causes you to overeat because your body can't actually tell you when to stop. Your body can fully control your portions and caloric intake, but not if it's eating the wrong thing that's screwing up the mechanism. There have also been studies actually showing that keeping isocaloric intake. So same calories, you have two groups and both are given the exact same calories, but one knocks out leptin. That group that knocks out leptin loses weight, even though they're eating the same calories. Okay. So
how would you do that though? How can you sort of either knock it out or not knock it out?
Knock out the leptin, you mean? Just remove it from the diet. Yeah, so you're given the same calorie intake,
okay,
but you're just getting slightly different food, one that doesn't have lectins in it.
Right. And the foods that are high in lectins.
Yeah, so there's a ton of them, right? So like beans, kidney beans, red beans, all these sorts of things. These are very high in lectins, like cassava melons. No, sorry, not cassava melons, but that's cyanide. But there's tons of different sorts of things. Beans are very, very typical for these sorts of things. Wheat and so forth. Soy as well can have lectins. There's a lot of different. Most plants will have lectins.
Right. Okay.
And this is another good reason to just not eat plants at all, is because of the lectins. And there's a ton of other things as well. Lectins are just one of them. That was one of the things that Dr. Gundry got very right. He talked all about, in the Plant Paradox book that he wrote, he talked all about lectins and how harmful these things were. But then his remedy for that was to take a pill designed by him that blocked lectins, as opposed to recognizing that this is a natural state for plants to defend themselves, and that lectins certainly cause problems, and blocking those lectins is great, but there are other things that cause harm as well. And so Gundry, I think, missed the bigger picture there, in understanding that just plants in general, yeah, exactly. Plants have a lot of defense mechanisms, lectins being one of them, but there are more. And so, he was saying he's still pushing that people should eat plants and so forth, but just, along with his medication that blocks lectins, fine. But there are other things that cause harm as well besides lectins. It's not just that. But that's the thing with lectins. Lectins are really interesting because it does all that, but it's also, it tracks obesity and so forth, but it's also been shown to be implicated in Parkinson's, right? So this is a really weird one because it can actually track up your vagus nerve. Vagus nerve comes down. It's one of your cranial nerve. It's your 10th cranial nerve. It comes down into your gut, and it regulates a lot of different sorts of autonomic functions in your body and your gut. People can have problems with this, and for various reasons, they can get them severed around the level of the stomach, and it's called the vagotomy. So this has been theorized that lectins can track up and get into your brain, cause damage to the area of your brain that secretes dopamine, thereby causing Parkinson's, which I think most people are aware of, is a very, very debilitating issue, and it's very, very hard for people to live with. So the idea is, okay, if this is tracking up the vagus nerve, then cutting the vagus nerve and stopping that direct channel should reduce people's likelihood of developing Parkinson's. And in fact, someone did that study. They looked in Denmark, and they looked from like 1977 to like mid 90s or something. Like it was like a 20-year span. Looked at every single patient that had a vagotomy for whatever reason, and looked at their incidence of Parkinson's. And they found that there was something like a 67% reduction in Parkinson's for this cohort. Okay, and actually since then, people have found actual mechanistic. They have tracked lectins tracking up the vagus nerve, actually getting into the brain and causing damage. So we actually have causative studies as well. So lectins do this as well, also cause are implicated in autoimmune diseases. So a ton of different autoimmune diseases. A lot of them are when autoimmune disease is your body all of a sudden starts attacking part of your body as if it were a foreign object or a pathogen. And so it's called autoantibodies, auto meaning that they attack yourself. So a lot of thought is put into this, and it's thought that the mechanism of this is likely to do with what's called molecular mimicry. So if you have an infection or some sort of virus or bacterial infection or exposed to something, your body mounts an immune response to this and makes antibodies to this pathogen or foreign object that are similar enough to parts of your body, then those antibodies will then now attack on to that part of your body and start binding to that. And once your body gets sensitive to something, it sniffs on something, says, okay, let's mount a response to this. This is tracking. And they make more and more sensitive antibodies to that, and they get more and more specific for that. And so your body can really knock out these parts of your body and really attack yourself, and it cause a lot of harm. So it's actually been shown that you can have molecular mimicry when your body attacks these lectins, because these lectins are essentially foreign bodies. They're alien to your body. They're not supposed to be there, and your body can mount an immune response to them. And so you can actually get this molecular mimicry from these lectins to then start attacking your body. And there have been studies showing that people that remove lectins and remove these sorts of plants, they actually reverse their autoimmune issues, and well, we call it being put in remission. You have this sort of issue and it can come back, but these people are put in remission for months and months and months, or even years. There was a study that went on, I think it was for about 2 years. So low sample size, there was only like 15 people. 10 of these guys went into complete remission and stayed in remission throughout the entire duration of the trial, and reduced their different markers of autoantibodies significantly. Absolutely, massive decrease. Now there's a smaller sample, there's a smaller study, only 15 people. So it's not really powered highly enough to be, academically conclusive, but it's very interesting. And it's something that, certainly deserves larger studies. And, this is directly what we're seeing in practice. So people that go onto a carnivore diet, or even a ketogenic diet where they're very careful about what they're eating, they significantly reduce their problems. And then when they go from keto into carnivore, it steps it up even more. They are just eliminate their autoimmune issues. And this is what we've seen with Dr. J. Salisbury, who we've spoken about before, who was curing cure a autoimmune diseases such as Crohn's, rheumatoid arthritis, ulcerative colitis, and so forth. So that he was doing that in the 1800s, and we were doing this for decades and decades and decades until we all of a sudden said, yeah, red meat's bad for you, and got rid of it. But people are rediscovering this, and I certainly have a lot of patients that have had significant improvements with it. People are reversing things that heretofore thought this is a permanent condition. This will only get worse. You'll be on tons of medications. You'll have a lot of surgeries, and you'll never get rid of this. Well, they're getting rid of it, and they're getting off all their medications and so forth. So it's quite significant just removing these sorts of things, and lectins play a big role in that as well.
It's interesting to sort of focus like we are now about the things like lectin and the toxins in plants, because often we kind of talk about the benefits of cutting out carbohydrates, primarily to do with the becoming more insulin sensitive, and also not storing that energy as body fat on your body, but to actually really focus on the chemicals that are in plants that are doing the damage is an interesting kind of a whole nother reason not to eat them.
Yeah, well, that's my whole argument with the ketogenic crew, is that you're eliminating sugar and carbohydrates, which is great. I fully support that, but there are other things that are bad. You know, we get quite myopic as people. We focus on one thing, and this is the thing, and then we forget about everything else. There are a lot of things going on in the world, and so we focused on cholesterol. That was the problem. That was the end all be all. And so everyone just got rid of cholesterol, got rid of fat, so forth. So you're seeing Entenmann's and candy, fat-free candy, and it's like, okay, that may not have fat in it, but it's definitely not good for you, even if, you know, fat weren't actually good for you, which it is. Then ketogenic sort of came in and said, okay, carbs, that's it. As long as it doesn't have carbs, it's fine. Well, no, not really. You know, there are more things. There are thousands and thousands and thousands of things. And lectins are a major one of them. There are tons of different kinds of lectins, and they do different things in your body. Gluten itself, like I said, causes leaky gut. Leaky gut can cause a whole bunch of problems because it actually let bacteria into your body. Those bacteria, depending on what it is, you know, can cause problems. There's specific types of bacteria that are found in the gut that can that have what's called lipopolysaccharides. And these can bind to your toll-like receptors. Getting a little technical, I won't get too technical, but it binds to your toll-like receptors. That's important, and it increases, you know, it's activating of that receptor, and that causes a significant cascade, which causes a lot of inflammation in your body. So these little bacteria get in your body, and then they cause huge amounts of inflammation through the toll-like receptor. There are other bacteria that actually suppress that. So like Bacteroides family actually block the toll-like receptor and reduce its output. So that actually is anti-inflammatory as opposed to pro-inflammatory. And you tend to get more Bacteroides and so forth in your gut when on a ketogenic or carnivore diet. And so, you know, even if you did have a bit of leaky gut, you would actually be a bit more protected from that. Gluten itself, and we'll sort of get back to the toll-like receptor later, but I just want to talk about, you know, gluten, because gluten can cause leaky gut, but it can, you know, cause other issues as well. And you know, we've actually seen a connection between gluten consumption and type 1 diabetes, likely through this, you know, lectin pathway that we discussed earlier. And there was a study in Denmark, I believe it was like 100,000 pregnancies, and looking at what the mothers ate. And they found that the mothers that ate more gluten containing foods, their kids were twice as likely to develop type 1 diabetes, which is, again, thought to be from, you know, molecular mimicry. First, we thought it was like, you know, like a virus. You have sort of some gastrointestinal issue, and then 2 weeks later, all of a sudden, you're just dropping weight. You can't put it on. You're thirsty all the time. You're peeing like crazy, and that certainly does happen. And we do see that, but you know, we do see this connection with gluten and lectins as well.
So the process there, Dr. Chaffee, it's like the mother's got this damaged gut from consuming too much gluten. Potentially like leaky gut or what have you, or what's the actual process, do you think, that's then causing their children to be unwell?
Oh, probably lectins, letting things in through the leaky gut, you know, because if you're eating the more gluten that you're eating, you're causing more breakdown of those tight junctions, and you're allowing things like lectins to come in. And lectins come with gluten, you know, because there will be lectins in whatever food contains gluten as well, and that cause harm in the body when you eat these things if you're not genetically adapted to dealing with them. So nightshades are a classic example. Potatoes, tomatoes, eggplants, peppers, these things are highly toxic. They, you know, all nightshades produce solanine. Solanine is deadly poisonous. 70 people a year still die from eating potatoes. You can look it up. And that's because, you know, as I was told when I was a kid, you have to store potatoes in a very specific way. You have to hide it under, you know, in a dark cupboard or cellar, because if it's exposed to light, it'll turn green. If it turns green, you can't eat it. It's bad for you. What does bad mean? It means it's poisonous. That's what it means. It's making more solanine, and that solanine will kill you. Or it starts growing a root. You can't eat it when it grows the root, or you have to cut out the entire eye. You can't just cut off the root part of it. You have to cut out the whole eye that's growing the root, or you just throw the stupid thing out just to be safe because it's bad.
It happens a lot. It grows roots quickly.
Yeah, exactly. And so, you know, that can kill you. And so people that don't know that, or don't take it as seriously, or maybe, you know, just cut off the root and not take out the whole eye or so forth, they can get seriously harmed from this. And again, 70 people a year die from eating just potatoes. So belladonna, tobacco, these are all nightshades as well. These things have horrible poisons in them that are very, very harmful. There are a lot of different things that plants can do. You can have toxins, which cause direct damage to the eater. You have hormone disruptors that screw up, it's pretty self-explanatory, screw up your hormones. Nutrient blockers, these make it difficult for your body to absorb the nutrients you're eating. So you're looking on the pack and saying, I'm getting these nutrients. No, you're not, because you're actually getting those blocked by the different things that are in that food. There's photosensitizers to make you sensitive to light. There's cyanogenic foods as well, that when you eat these things, it crushes and it releases cyanide. Cassava melons are a very good example of this, but we also have almonds. So almonds have a small amount of cyanide in them, but it's not that small, because 1 to 2 pounds of almonds, 400 to 800 grams of almonds is a lethal dose of cyanide in an adult. Okay. And we just give this stuff to kids. We sell it at stores without age restriction, which I think is wild. Bitter almonds, which are like when you crack open a peach pit, there's like this shriveled looking almond that's called a bitter almond. 1 or 2 of those will kill you. That's that much cyanide in them. Cassava melons, yucca, these things are traditionally eaten in tropical areas and impoverished areas. They're a main staple of the diet. I think cassava melons are the 3rd most important source of calories in tropical areas. They have so much toxins in them. If you don't prepare these things properly, you'll just die. And people do die still to this day when they don't prepare them properly. And even when you do prepare them properly, but you're eating this as a staple of your diet long term, you get serious thyroid issues, neurological issues, very serious neurological issues from eating these things long term, because you're still getting low-grade poisoning the whole time, even though you've prepared it in a certain way that you're knocking out a lot of these things. And people talk about lectins are heat sensitive, and that's true. It is at a certain temperature you can knock out these lectins, but not all of them. And how many things do we cook to fruition? We're not cooking cereal, for example. Now you have the processing of that. Sometimes they use heat in processing, but not always. And they don't always use enough heat to knock out all the lectins. So breakfast cereals and so forth commonly have a ton of lectins. Oats, people eat like muesli and so forth, that just the cereals and so forth, they just eat the grains, the whole grains. And these things are just having, raw, unheat treated lectins and many other things as well. And so it's very dismissive and I think ignorant to say that, oh, you can just cook it, it'll be fine. You don't cook everything. And, and not everybody knows that. There was, you have like red beans, kidney beans, things like that. You have to soak them for like 4 or 5 hours, and then you have to boil them for at least 10 minutes. If you don't do that, these things can cause serious, serious harm to you. You can be extremely sick when you eat these. They're very, very toxic. And that's from the lectins. The lectins are just so prevalent. So, there's toxins that can cause damage to your metabolism, or structurally, it can damage your, gut lining, can cause, actually leave your gut in tatters, as has been described. This tears apart the gut lining. Supposed to be in insects to try to eat these leaves, and it just tears them to shreds. And, we think about leaky gut, that's sort of a toned down version of this. But when your gut's just raw and in pieces, obviously it's not going to be barrier protection. It's not going to be able to stop the invasion of these different sorts of elements into your body that your body doesn't want. We think about things like, hemlock, right? Like water hemlock is one of the most poisonous plants in North America. How this kills you is it's a neurotoxin. So it's is a GABA receptor antagonist. So antagonist means it blocks it, stops it from working, right? GABA is one of the molecules in your brain that sort of slows things down. Okay. And you have to have this balance. You have excitatory molecules and things that sort of reduce that excitation. GABA is one of those things. And this can make you calm, this can make you peaceful and so forth. But if you don't have it, you get too excited. When you get too excited, this is called a seizure. And all of the cells in your brain just fire off at once, and you get into a massive seizure. And water hemlock can block that GABA receptor to the point that your body cannot inhibit these excitatory signals, and you'll die from seizures within minutes. Your body cannot stop them. So this is quite serious. It can also, things like Cyanide can block your respiration. You get too much of this stuff, you can't move oxygen into your hemoglobin properly because it's bound up, and this kills you. You can't actually move gases throughout your body, so this screws your respiration and it kills you. Hormone disruptors. There's a ton of different things like that I've spoken about before, like phytoestrogens in soy. People don't realize this. They talk about all the hormones in meat. I still get this to this day. I need to do sort of a video or post on this, but people talking about, what I don't want to eat all these meats, meats because they have all these hormones in it, and how maybe the meat's good for you, but they give them all these growth hormones and so forth, and it changes their hormone panel, and I don't want that in my body. Well, first of all, you have to realize that they give these hormones early on in the cow's life so that they can grow, right? There's no point in giving them a medication that costs money the day before they're processed and then have that in their body. So this is out of their system, long before you ever come across it. But people have looked at this and found that if 3 ounces of lean, untreated beef has about 2 nanograms of estrogen in it, and then hormone treated cow, 3 grams of lean meat will have about, I think, 3.9 nanograms. So that's, and so people say there's twice as much estrogen in that, and that's technically correct
relative to not much.
Yeah, exactly, because it's technically correct. It is double, but put it in context, because a fertile woman makes about 150 to 180,000 nanograms of estrogen a day. So increasing that by 2, really not changing too much. Cabbage, 3 ounces of cabbage has 400 nanograms. The birth control pill has 35,000 nanograms, right? There's different kinds of birth control pills, some have more or less, but that's an average. And then people don't realize that things like soy, 3 ounces of soy have over 1 million nanograms of estrogen. Okay, so you're talking like 20 times the amount of estrogen in 3 ounces of soy than the birth control pill. And this can be easily demonstrated by the fact that there are doctors and different supplement companies that recommend soy supplements and eating soy for postmenopausal women, because it sort of replaces their estrogen. It's almost like, HRT, hormone replacement therapy. But again, you don't know exactly the dose you're getting all the other crap that's with soy. So is this really a good idea? But in the same breath, people are then saying, oh, kids should eat soy too. Soy is really good. I'm sorry, you're using this medicinally for a postmenopausal woman who doesn't make estrogen. Now you're giving this to kids, and you're giving them their like soy protein, soy-based formulas and so forth for babies. That's honestly, I think that is, I think that's child abuse. Honestly,
the
most
the baby formula.
Yeah, and so giving this stuff to kids, or even recommending this stuff to kids, any doctor who does that, I think, needs to take a class in botany, and then if they don't really get the lesson, they should probably lose their license, because that's causing serious harm. Hormones have the most dramatic effect in development, and so when you screw up a kid's hormonal signals when they're that young, you have changed them for life, and you have really caused serious problems for the rest of their life that they will never recover from fully, because you develop to a point and then that's it. You're static, and you can optimize your health from there, but you have developed into X and you will stay X. Whereas if you didn't have those influences, you would have developed into Y. And so that is something permanent that you do to children. I don't think that's right. It's quite bad. But yeah,
Dr. Chaffee, can we talk a bit about the nutrient blockers? Because I know people will look on the back of a packet, or they'll Google, how many nutrients are in a certain fruit or vegetable. But the reality is that these nutrients aren't as bioavailable as they are when you're eating animal-based foods. So the classic example, I think, is when people buy vegan protein. So they look in the back and they think, if I have 2 scoops of this, I'll get 30 grams of protein. But how much of that protein are you actually absorbing? And how much of it is just coming out the other end?
Yeah, the answer to that is not much. You're not absorbing much of that. And we see this in various studies looking at, in the fecal content of people, that you see the plant-based proteins come out the other end, just like you're saying, or people with stomas. where they have a disruption of their bowel for some reason, and they have a bag that comes out, and they just measure the contents of that. And they find that people that eat animal-based proteins, they absorb almost all of that, especially if they're not eating fiber. They will absorb basically all of that, because fiber disrupts how your body absorbs food. That's another way that plants are not your friends, is because the fiber actually disrupts and blocks your body from digesting, breaking down, and absorbing things. So that's a physical barrier to your absorption of these nutrients. And the plant-based proteins, a lot of this stuff comes out. So you think about gluten. As you're saying, gluten coming from wheat. Gluten is 80% of the protein in wheat. But gluten can't be used as a protein. So 80% of the protein in wheat is unusable. So it'll say 30 grams of protein, and how much of that are you getting? A few grams maybe. So it's very different. And so the bioavailability of these things, because we're just told it contains this mineral, this element, this nutrient, and so forth, this amount of proteins. It's not true. That doesn't mean that that's first of all, there's a difference between crude protein and actual functional protein. Crude protein is just the amount of nitrogen that exists. That's not necessarily nitrogen in the form of protein, because protein has an amino group that has a nitrogen in it. That's what makes it a protein. But they just measure the amount of nitrogen, not necessarily the amount of nitrogen in protein. So crude protein is just all the nitrogen that's in there. And there's quite a lot of nitrogen in sort of plant foods that have nothing to do with protein. So that's another thing as well. The different sorts of nutrient blockers that specifically block nutrients, there are things that are like enzyme inhibitors. So they don't allow your body to break down certain sorts of things. So this would block different proteases and lipases from breaking down protein, from breaking down fat, so that you can break it down into a smaller form, so that you can then absorb it. So it blocks that, stops that, so these things stay as big protein molecules, and now they're passing through. They can get to your gut, and your gut biome can eat them. And all the arguments on animal protein causing a problem because it gets to your gut biome. Well, the only reason that they're getting to your gut biome is if you're blocking it from being broken down and absorbed in the first place. So if you don't eat plants, you're not going to have those types of bacteria anyway, because we talked about the bacteroides and different sorts of bacteria found in the gut. You have an optimal gut biome when eating keto, and especially carnivore. And if you're not eating all these plant-based sorts of things in the first place, you're going to absorb all of this. So these are going to block proteases and so forth, which would make it so they're indigestible and you can't break them down, you can't absorb them. Soy has a lot of these, which is kind of interesting when you're talking about soy protein as a major supplement. And so you have soy can actually block proteases. So you eat a bunch of soy protein, and just the inherent nature of the soy, unless they're very careful about eliminating the stuff out of them, which I doubt they are, that's going to stop your body from even utilizing and breaking down the soy protein. So even if you were going to,
it's doing the opposite of what you want.
Soy protein. Exactly. Yeah. And so you're going to get basically none of the soy, of the protein that exists in soy. Yeah. You're just going to get all the crap that you don't want.
And boobs, perfect.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, that's the thing, 8 glasses of soy milk a day is enough estrogen to grow breasts in a man. And so if that's not what you're going for, you might want to avoid soy, and especially
hold off on the soy lattes.
Yeah, exactly. And if you're lactose intolerant and you want to put milk in, you just forego. You don't have to put milk in
black.
Yeah, exactly. You don't drink it at all. You don't have to drink any of that crap. And just because you call something milk doesn't make it milk. If it didn't come from a mammal, it's not milk. It's like the famous saying from Abraham Lincoln. He was addressing a congregation of people, and he said, if you call a dog's tail a leg, how many legs does a dog have? And everyone said 5. He said, no, 4. Just because you call a tail a leg does not make it a leg. We have to live in reality. Just because you call something something else doesn't actually change its inherent nature. And so the same thing, wheat proteases, protease inhibitors, these again do the same thing, where they're blocking protease, and that protease cannot break down your proteins that you're trying to eat, so you can't absorb them. But these also, going back to the toll light receptor, wheat protease inhibitors actually can stimulate the toll light receptors as well. And so this actually develops another inflammatory cascade. So this is, it's not just blocking protein absorption that this is causing a problem to. This is also causing huge amounts of inflammation and problems in your body, which again can dysregulate, dysregulate your immune system, and has been implicated in autoimmune dysregulation as well. So again, playing into the autoimmune issues also. One of the ones that I find very, very interesting are the photosensitizers. When you're eating different plants, generally you don't see this in plant animals in the wild. Generally you see this in pasture raised animals that run out of food because of neglect or some other reason. And they start eating plants that they normally wouldn't, and they get problems. And so there are different plants and different leaves that they can eat. You see picture of this on the internet. We can probably put a good lecture from a botanist, professor of botany in Texas. I think was very interesting. And he shows a lot of pictures of these, talks about gets into the more of the details on everything I'm talking. Well, not everything I'm talking about, some of the things I'm talking about. And one of them is these photosensitizers, and you have these pictures of sheep that got into this thing. Their whole face is swollen up and burned and cracked. It's very nasty to see. But there are just simple things in our food supply, like limes and celery. There's a thing called celery dermatitis. That's an actual medical condition. People that eat a lot of celery or handle celery, pick celery, work with celery, and don't wear gloves and so forth, this stuff can soak in their skins, or obviously if they eat it. And this causes them to be very, very sensitive to UV light. And so their body is not protected anymore. And you get horrible, horrible burns. So they have to wear hats, gloves, sun cream all over their body, long sleeve shirts. They get a little bit of exposure. They get horribly, horribly burned. And, I haven't seen too many very tan vegans, and this is, again, I think probably part to do with that they burn very easily in the sun. First and foremost to do with the photosensitizers, but also to do with the increased amount of inflammation they have in their body, causing more harm when they get skin damage, as opposed to being able to heal that. Limes are also a culprit, but specifically the oils on the outside of a lime. A lime is an unripe fruit, really. We pick these things green, and we like the taste of that when they're green. But a green fruit, an unripe fruit, means that the seeds aren't ready yet either. So the plant really doesn't want you to mess with it. And that's generally when you find a lot more chemicals and a lot more toxins is in an unripe fruit, like tomatoes, green tomatoes. These things can cause serious harm, especially when you're just eating these regularly. And that's why folk wisdom would tell us that you don't eat green tomatoes. Green tomatoes are poisonous, and they're right. They have to vine ripen to get those out of there. So limes, same category. So the seeds aren't ready to go yet, and so they don't want you to eat it. And so one of the barrier protections are this oils on the lime. So if you're handling limes, picking limes without gloves, and you're out in the sun, you can get horribly burned. There are many medical cases of people getting second-degree burns from sunlight after handling limes. It actually happened to my younger brother when we were kids, and we had a lime tree in our backyard in Southern California. And he was out there sort of picking limes and just being a little kid. And all of a sudden came back and he was just covered in horrible welts and red wheals and things like that. And we thought this was an allergic reaction. We thought that he was having an anaphylactic sensitizing reaction, and that the next one was basically just going to kill him. He'd just explode with histamines. So we kept him away from the lime tree. Later on, he was able to eat limes and use limes and drink Coronas with limes and so forth. And we just figured, well, maybe he just got over that allergy. But looking back on it, that's almost certainly what happened to him. He had this reaction to the oils in the limes, and he got a bad sunburn from it.
Specifically from the skin, right, of the lime?
Yeah, from the oils that are secreted from the skin. Yeah, so you touch on that, and you can kind of feel there's a bit of film on limes. And so there's a bit of oils on there that gets in, that soaks into your skin. And then you get very, very sensitive to light, not just in the area that it's soaked into, but systemically. It gets into your whole system. And so any part of your body that's exposed to sun will get much more sensitive to light, and in high enough doses and exposure to sun, you get second degree burns. Second degree burns are very, very serious burns. So it's not just a bad sunburn. It's a serious medical condition when you get to that point of second degree burns. And then of course, all the different plants that use cyanide. So there's over 2,500 different plants that use cyanide. And this is, quite evidently a protection against predation, because they're bound up, but when they're crushed, then they release cyanide. So basically something starts eating it and crushes it and it destroys it. And all of a sudden it releases all of this cyanide into the whatever's eating it. That can stop your respiration and kill you in high enough doses. And like I said, there's almonds, bitter almonds, like cherry leaves, like cherries in the cherry pits. There's a bunch of them, but in the leaves, there's a ton of these things. So, if a branch falls off into a pasture, farmers and ranchers are very, very careful to get those away from the cows right away, because they can, kill your cattle. Sorghum grass. So there's like different kinds of grass. Cows eat grass, but they eat specific kinds of grass. And so some grasses are actually harmful. And there's some of these that you have to sort of keep your cows away from, or try to get it out of your pasture if that sort of grass gets into it. And then cassava and yucca and so forth can do all that. Now sort of jumping back a bit, people say like, well, people in Asia eat soy all the time and they all really like it. Well, first of all, how healthy is the average person in Asia, first of all, because the average height of a population denotes the average health of the population. We saw the Mongols, with Genghis Khan, the Mongol horde, we were saying last time, on average 6'4" on average. Okay, so now the average height in Mongolia is 5'6". In China, it's 5'8". Okay, but we know that humans are supposed to be on average 6'4". Okay, so they're not exactly all that healthy necessarily anyway. So that's not a very good argument, because you're not saying there's a bunch of 6'4" badasses eating a bunch of soy, or at least developing on soy and then becoming a big 6'8" monster. But the thing is that they actually don't eat all that much soy. They don't eat as much soy as people like to think they do. And they generally use it in things like soy sauce and different sorts of seasonings and condiments and so forth that use soy. It's not necessarily they're just eating a bunch of just pounds and pounds and pounds of soy. And when they do, they ferment it. Okay, so they've been fermenting soy, which can break down some of these harmful components in soy to make it safer to eat and so forth. So it's not as cut and dry as, well, Asians eat soy, so therefore it's good for you. There's more to it than that. A, they're not all that healthy anyway. B, they're not eating as much as you think. C, they're fermenting it, which changes things. So eating just a block of raw tofu, not a good idea. Edamame, not a good idea, not in any real volume anyway.
Interesting. Yeah, edamame is a very popular little entree in cafe in restaurants at the moment.
Yeah, very good.
All right. Well, you've put forward a very strong argument for why it's not worth eating plants and all the different damages that we can do or that can be done to humans when we do eat them. Is there anything that you want to end on, or anything that you want to kind of ram home, Dr. Chaffee?
Yeah, well, I think the main take home is that there are thousands and thousands and thousands of different ways that plants, do protect themselves. And, I like to say that, plants are trying to kill you, and they are, insofar as you're trying to kill them by trying to eat them. So if you don't try to eat them, they're not going to cause harm to you. They're very beneficial. Obviously, we exist in an ecosystem with plants. Are very beneficial in a lot of respects, but they are living organisms. They want to stay living organisms, and if you eat them, they die. And so they will defend themselves just like anything else. And more power to them. They should. So that's the main take home, is that you live and let live with plants, and you'll be fine. And that there are much more than just one thing. We can't be myopic and just say, oh, lectins, oh, cholesterol, oh, carbohydrates, or even, I rail against, sugar and fructose and so forth, which are very, very bad, but they're not the only bad thing. They are one of many, many things that don't help us live optimal, healthy lives. But you don't have to know all the different ones. You don't have to know why they cause harm and all the different sorts of details on it. All you have to know is, don't eat plants. We're not designed to eat plants. We're designed to eat meat, and these things have harmful components. And if you just stop eating plants, you'll do much, much, much better. And even some things people say, oh, well, coffee is not all that bad. Well, this isn't that bad, and I'm just doing a little bit. Yeah, you're right. You cut out 99% of the plants that you're eating, you're going to be way better off than almost everybody else on earth. But, they are still going to be causing harm. They are going to prevent you from living optimally. And I think that that's something that everyone should experience at least once in their life. Do it for a few months and just see what you think. I personally am never going to go back. I love how I feel. I love feeling the way I do all the time. And so I really don't have any inclination to not feel like that, especially for, vegetables. Like, my God, I never wanted to eat those things anyway, So, it's just something I think everyone should try and just go pure, at least for a month or 3 months, ideally, and then see how you feel. Me personally, I took that and I just ran with it. My parents, the same way. My mom's a big foodie. She loves cooking these different things. She literally has over 500 cookbooks. She's read every single damn one of them. She loves cooking. She loves different kinds of food. And she was doing this for a month with my father to support him because he wanted to try, and it significantly helped him, help his Parkinson as well, dramatically. And she at first was really not liking it. And she wanted to cook different things. She wanted to eat different things. She was getting very frustrated with it. But after a month, she saw how her blood sugars were doing and how much better she was feeling. And she was losing weight and feeling better and better and better. And she said, well, I kind of have to keep going with this. My blood sugars are so well controlled. And in fact, I'm actually coming off my medications to control my blood sugar. And after 2 months, she was off pretty much all of her medications. And her HbA1c went from 8.9, which is very high, down to 6.9, which is the upper limit of normal for non-diabetic. So she just said, okay, I just have to keep doing this. So even my mom, who really didn't want to do this, she was really against this. She's now been a full carnivore for 4 years because she just feels so much better and she's just so much more healthy. And I think that that's something that everyone should at least experience once and see for themselves, and then just decide for themselves if that's the way they want to live. Certainly is the way I want to live.
Yeah, amazing. That's really well said. Just to reiterate what Dr. Chaffee said, if you get 90% of the way there and you do something like keto, you eat minimum plants, mainly meat, you'll feel amazing. And as Dr. Chaffee said, you'll feel 99% better than everyone else. But if you want to experiment with strict carnivore, doing a full month or more, where you can really find out how you feel when you're operating at 100%, you don't have any of these things holding you back, it's certainly worth experimenting. And you can always introduce things in after, or you can continue to go hardcore strict carnivore like Dr. Chaffee. So yeah, that's really, I think that's really insightful.
Yeah, well, and that's something that I've said before, is I think the last 5% of going pure carnivore, gives you about 95% of the benefits. I really I've found that in myself and in my patients, that they get so much improvement. But then when they just really drop those last couple things, the artificial sweeteners, the coffee, the little treats here and there, that all of a sudden they just go, I had no idea. I just feel so much better. I just feel amazing. And it's just such a little thing. We don't think that it's going to cause that much problem, but it really does disrupt a lot, especially the artificial sweeteners. It's just like, Jesus, just get rid of all of those things. And you get so much more benefit out of that just by eliminating that last little bit. And I've certainly noticed that, myself and with my patients.
I haven't quite cut out the coffee yet. I still have black coffee.
Yeah. That's a tough one for a lot of people. Yeah. But literally every single person that I talk to, and I've sort of railed against coffee a few times, and a few people say, like, I'm going to give it a try. I'm just going to cut out coffee as well. And a couple of weeks they're like, oh, I had no idea. I just had no idea it was screwing me over that bad. I feel so much better. My energy levels are so much better. I just feel fantastic all the time. I'm so glad I got rid of coffee. And we think it's a little counterintuitive because coffee gives you energy, right? Not really, for a little bit.
Yeah,
and then you feel like crap. And then you eat more and more. Yeah, exactly. But it has other things in it too, So if you're going to do it, I would really just get a caffeine tablet, because you're going to get the caffeine, which is what you want. And you're not going to get the 150,000 other chemicals that exist in coffee as well. And again, coffee is a bean. Bean is a seed. Seed is a plant's baby. So there are a lot of things in coffee that you really don't want. Besides the caffeine, caffeine is a neurotoxin. I was actually talking to someone the other day who, had serious epilepsy and was having had serious seizures and so forth all their life, And they went ketogenic to sort of combat this. And they were actually able to come off a lot of their medications. And they decided to go sort of full carnivore. They're still drinking, I forget. And they cut out coffee and all these sorts of things. And then they tried coffee as well and had some caffeine, and it kicked off their seizures again. So they're like, okay, stay away from that thing. And, not everyone is going to have epilepsy. Not everyone's going to be subject to that. However, it's not going to be good, as this person pointed out. So it's causing seizures in people like me. It may not cause seizures in you, but it's certainly not going to be good for you. It's doing something serious to your body.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, if it's showing up severely in that other person who's susceptible, it's still affecting us somehow.
Yeah, exactly. And we just don't see it as readily as they do. But it is causing issues. And this person was saying that in their view, that caffeine was a neurotoxin because it screws up your brain to such a degree that people that are prone to epilepsy have seizures. Which is, trust me, you don't want.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, if you want help going strict carnivore, send a DM to myself or Dr. Chaffee, and we'll help. Because as we said, it's worth doing. It's worth experimenting with. You never know how good you're going to feel.
Absolutely.
Awesome. All right, Dr. Chaffee, thank you so much. Plants are trying to kill you. You nailed it. That's absolutely in your ballpark, and you hit it for 6, or you hit a home run, either or. Well done.
Great. Thanks a lot, man. Good talking to you.
All right. See ya.